Howdy there, YouTube. My name is Janaki, and over here we have Madame Beth Shiva, and together we are Catamancy Tarot. So today I wanted to hop on to initiate this new series of videos I'd like to do called Community Engaged Tarot. So if you're new here, I am a cultural anthropologist at the University of Michigan, and I'm doing my dissertation research on contemporary tarot practice. And my research specifically it's a comparative project looking at tarot reading practices in Los Angeles as well as Mumbai, India. Some of the things I'm interested in are looking at the figure of the tarot reader as a kind of cultural expert who help people make important decisions. I'm also interested in the relationship between tarot readings and the future, so thinking about different cultural orientations towards the future. And then lastly, I'm also interested in the kind of long-term historical exchange in ideas and practices around spirituality between South Asia, specifically India, and the West. And so with this series of videos that I would like to do, this community engaged tarot, what I'm looking to do is kind of pick your guys' brains on different topics that I'm exploring in my research and get a chance to hear your guys' thoughts, opinions, experiences as a way to incorporate that into my research. One of the challenges that I faced doing my dissertation research is, and you'll have heard about this if you had heard my introduction video, is that I've had to do all of my research during the pandemic, and what cultural anthropology looks like on the ground is me just going out and hanging out with people, talking to them, learning about their experience, doing something called participant observation, which is where I'm just engaged in whatever activities people are doing and also participate in them and write up my observations. And so all of that is very, very social, and can't really do a lot of that during the pandemic. So I've had to develop techniques and do a lot of my research virtually. And so part of that has meant that I have watched a lot of tarot YouTube videos. And so I've recently started this channel as a way to answer the question, like, how do you do anthropology of YouTube and do participant observation on YouTube? You also make videos and you also join in and be a part of the conversations that are ongoing. So this video series is kind of a way for me to kind of engage in the community and ask you guys some of my research questions. And so in this series, I'd like to cover topics around, tarot ethics. There's a couple kind of hot topics that are going around that I'd love to hear your guys' input on. I'd like to do some videos about the idea of what it means to connect to a reading or connect to a deck, or what it means to have something resonate. I'm also just curious to learn more about whatever different sort of topics I'm looking at, to kind of be able to throw that, whatever I'm thinking out to you guys and get a little bit of a, feedback or response. So my research can have this sort of like back and forth conversational aspect. And so that's what some of my goals are with this series. And I'm hoping that you guys will be able to join in. Ideally, with this series, what I'll do is I'll come up with a list of questions and invite you guys to do some video responses. It's the same exact idea of doing a tag. And so a lot of the tags that are already going out and going around are, for me, kind of very ethnographic, because they're a great way for me to kind of like get into what your guys' practice is and sharing of thoughts. So the format already exists, so I'm not really inventing anything. The only difference is that I'm going to be writing about your responses in my dissertation, and so by replying, you're giving me consent to do that. However, if you are someone who watches a lot of TarotTube and wants to help me out but isn't someone who enjoys or wants to make a video, what I've done is I've created a little survey. There's a link below in the description. So if you would like to, I'd like to invite you to kind of fill that out so you can kind of like journal along with these questions. And that will be a way for me to kind of hear your responses and hear your voice, even if you don't make videos. Or if you're someone who makes videos, but some of the questions might get a little bit personal and you're not really comfortable sharing that publicly, I'd like to invite you to make a video, set it to private, and then allow me to view it. And then what I'll do is I will remove any identifying information from that, use pseudonyms, make sure all of your information is private. And if I do use your video in my dissertation, that way you will have, your privacy ensured that way. So with those disclaimers aside, to kick off this series, I thought it'd be a great idea to ask, what is your tarot origin story? Now, we've all sort of shared our tarot origin story over videos or bits and pieces, but with this series of questions, I'm hopefully trying to get at a little bit around what people's backgrounds are, to kind of see if there's any commonalities, any common stories, or any common draws people bring with them that sort of like hooks them into the tarot world. And so I thought this would be a great series of questions to start us off with. So let me pull up my questions here. So question number 1 I have for you guys is, what kind of religious upbringing did you have? And so I know for some folks, people come to tarot as a rebellion against whatever their original religious upbringing was, perhaps, conservative parents, conservative faiths, kind of reactionary, turning to tarot as a way to kind of explore something that feels a little bit more genuine, perhaps. I also know that for some people it's the opposite. Some people might be, tarot natives, or have family members who have passed down tarot as something that, you always grew up with, right? My second question is, what was your very first exposure to tarot like, and how did you get your very first deck? So this is your first deck is always a topic that we like to talk about here on Tarot YouTube. But I also want to know what your first, what was your earliest memory of tarot before you even, you got the deck? I'm curious, kind of like what was your exposure? What was your initial reaction or thoughts about it? Question number 3 is, when did tarot become a more important part of your practice? And when, if ever, did you stop being a skeptic? So in other words, what was your moment of like tarot conversion like? And I know for some folks, you maybe had, a first reading, a friend did a reading and you weren't really sure about it. And maybe it was that first reading that kind of like, you had that moment of conversion, or maybe that process took a lot of time, or maybe, and I know for some folks, you can use tarot while still being a little bit skeptical, and maybe that skepticism never really goes away. So I'm curious to hear what your relationship with skepticism and tarot has been like in your tarot journey. Next question is, when did you start reading for others or start reading for clients, and why? Or if you never read for others, did you ever think about it? So with this, there's this kind of, one of the things I'm curious about is if there's this sort of like standard trajectory of how people become tarot readers. I know for a lot of folks, you get your first deck, you don't get into it right away, but later on you have something that really sort of hooks you into it. And then, there's this process of like going off books and then like reading for yourself and then reading for others. And so I'm curious about what that sort of trajectory has looked like for you. Question number 5, I think, is a fun one, and it's what are some of your qualities from your background that make you a good reader? So that is, what are some of the things that you bring to the table as a reader, and what do you think your tarot superpower is? So with this question, I'm curious what kind of backgrounds people come from, and people, come from all sorts of different places, and wherever they're coming from, they're bringing something unique and interesting to the table. So I'm interested in hearing about what you think what your tarot superpower is. What makes you sort of unique as a reader? If we're talking about origin stories, I feel like superheroes usually have an origin story, so I want to know what yours is. And then question number 6 is, when did you get into TarotTube, and what is your relationship with social media and tarot like? And so TarotTube and tarot and social media has kind of like exploded during the pandemic. I've been watching TarotTube since 2018. And so like I've noticed over the past 5 years even, there's been this like really big growth. And so I'm curious to know what your relationship with social media is, especially around tarot, and how did you discover TarotTube, and how did you become a viewer or a creator, or when did you decide to start your channel? So those are the questions I have for you for this first series, and so now I'm going to take a crack at answering them all for you. All right, so here we go. Question number 1, what kind of religious upbringing did you have? So I was actually raised as a Hare Krishna in the United States, in Denver, Colorado. So if you're familiar with the Hare Krishnas, they're a Hindu religious organization, also known as ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And it was brought over to the States from India during sort of the 60s and 70s. Prabhupada was the main guru who brought everything over, and it became popularized by folks like, George Harrison, John Lennon, and so my parents sort of joined up that movement in the 80s in New York City, and then I was raised as a Hare Krishna. And so I have a fairly atypical religious upbringing. So when I was a kid, I had kind of no idea. The rest of the world didn't really know who Krishna was, and we lived kind of in this little bit of an enclave. So all of my friends growing up were Hare Krishnas, and then like going to elementary school was a little bit of a shock. And so after after a while, my mom and I sort of moved away from the temple, and my mom was someone who was a very, and still is a very spiritual person, and so she sort of pulled me through the gamut of not only the, Hare Krishna movement, but she was also interested in a whole gambit of different New Age spiritual practices. So, like I was a certified aura cleanser at age 11. She would take me to like laughter yoga things, which I thought was terrifying. You sort of name it. I sort of explored it. And so it's kind of interesting for me. That's kind of where my relationship with India first started, is because I had this connection with it from a young age. Like all of my bedtime stories were from the Ramayana, and my name Janaki, it's actually a name for Sita, who is Ram's wife in the Ramayana. So I have a really strong connection with it, and I've since sort of moved away from that in my own sort of personal practice. But I've still, that's where this like big, connection and interest came from later on in life, when I decided to study anthropology and anthropology of religion and Hinduism. So that's where that background comes from. And so for me, I didn't, tarot was kind of part of that milieu, part of that, what was just sort of in the water at that time. So for me, it wasn't so much that I was sort of rejecting everything and finding tarot, it was that tarot was sort of already a part of a lot of that. But I've also since developed a little bit of a sort of a distance or a critical distance between a lot of New Age spiritual practices that sort of my mom took me through when I was a teen. And that was part of my teen rebellion. And later it turned into this sort of more critical engagement with anthropology. I did my undergrad dissertation on New Age and neo-shamanism in the United States and sort of all of the problems involved with sort of, white people shamans, right? And so that's kind of what my background, my religious background is. So question number 2 is, what was your first exposure to tarot and when did you get your very first deck? So maybe no surprises here, but back when I was a kid running around the Hare Krishna temple in the gift shop was like a very magical place for me. And sometimes there was a tarot reader who also worked in the gift shop. And they just had the Rider-Waite-Smith, the iconic images. And I remember kind of like peeking in, and there was that feeling of like, it felt very powerful. It felt very like sacred. It felt very mystical. And so later on, when I was in probably my early teens, like middle school, I demanded that my mom take me to a metaphysical shop so I could buy my very first deck. And my very first deck was the Rider-Waite-Smith yellow box. And so that's how I first picked it up. And I carried only that deck with me through high school, through college, and through the first part of my early 20s and into grad school. And that was the only deck that I had for the longest time. But it was a kind of a, that was my first exposure to what tarot was. So question number 3, when did tarot become a more important part of your practice? And when, if ever, did you stop being a skeptic? And what was your sort of moment of tarot conversion like? So, as I said, for the longest time, I had a tarot deck, I had a tarot book. I never really sort of went off book. I always sort of, doing a reading was always like a little bit of a process. And I would take it out for like special occasions, or so it wasn't something that I was like really dedicated to or really invested in until a couple years into my I'm currently a 7th year. I'm in my 7th year of graduate school, which is wild. But after my 2nd year of grad school, I got out of a 6-year-long relationship, and I was in India. I was doing a summer Hindi language program, and one of my friends had brought a tarot deck with her to India. So this would have been the summer of probably like 2018 or something like that. And so the deck that she brought with her, I've got here to show you. This is the Tarot del Fuego. And so this was the first time that I had ever seen a tarot deck that had really sort of very modern, new take. Like it wasn't just completely, like your typical new age metaphysical shop fare. It was something that was very contemporary and hip, and like I was just really into it. And I think that summer I was also, I was going through this like really big breakup, and part of what she offered with tarot was this kind of like female solidarity and sociality, and like she would come over, we would have a sleepover even though we were like, in our 20s. And we would read the cards, and it was just that was the moment that I was like, oh, this is something to offer me. And so when I got back to the US, that's when I kind of really started my tarot deep dive. I started doing research on, like, I've got to find the perfect deck out there for me. It's out there somewhere. And that's when I sort of first found out about tarot YouTube. It's when I first, got into like getting and buying new decks. That's when I kind of really, really went in on tarot. And I think it's because I was coming out of this place of like really big emotional turmoil and upheaval. And also, there's a lot of uncertainty in grad school. Every step of this process, I've had to apply for grants, and, I have to do my preliminary exams, and then you have to, write up your prospectus, and then you have to do field work, and you have to get funded for all of that. And so tarot, I think this is the case for a lot of folks, is like people turn to tarot specifically during a time of upheaval or during a time of great uncertainty. And that was certainly the case for me. And, during the pandemic, I took what had become a hobby, and I turned it into my dissertation. Next question is, when did tarot become, the second part of this question is, what was your moment of tarot conversion like? And so for me, I'm an academic. I'm kind of like an academic first and a tarot reader second. So for me, there was always a bit of, I didn't need it to be magical for it to work. But then after working with it for a while, and kind of developing my own readings, like, at bedtime, you light the candle, you get out the special space, you make it kind of the special moment. And so after, maybe 6 months of like treating it as more of this, creating this kind of sacred space around it, I started to have readings that didn't just feel like cards on a table coincidence, and I started kind of, I felt like really seen by the cards. Like I would pull cards and just be like, obviously, of course. And like we've had these moments, right? But they didn't happen for me right away. And it took me a while of really sort of creating that space for those moments to kind of happen. And it's been something that's been gradual for me. I'm still someone who's like very analytic. I have trouble sometimes allowing myself some of the magic. I'm a little bit of a fox molder. Like I want to believe, right? Yeah, for me the conversion process was a little bit slower and gradual, and it was something over time. So I didn't just like pick up a couple of my first decks and I was like, become an instant believer in, connecting to something other than myself, other than just cards on the table. And I know for some people you can read tarot without ever having this sort of connection with something other than tarot as just a material object. But for me, in moments I do experience that. And so I'm curious about, for you guys, did you just have was it just one pivotal reading, or was it kind of like a gradual process? And it's also for some folks, we might be perpetual skeptics. That might be part of it too. So yeah. Next question is number 4. When did you start reading for others? Or reading for clients, and why? Or if you haven't, have you ever thought about it? So for me, I've had this kind of, I guess, what I would call sort of fairly typical timeline, where for the longest time I just had my one deck and my one book, and I only dipped in, very occasionally. And then I had this experience of getting more and more into it, and suddenly, I was eating up all of these tarot books and guidebooks and things like that, and didn't need to like consult books anymore to do a reading. And then I started having sort of grad school tarot parties, so inviting people over and like doing readings for them. And so it started with just friends. And then I would like to challenge myself and just like bring a deck in my purse everywhere with me for a while. And so at parties pre-pandemic, I would bring a deck around, and through those moments, I would be able to kind of read for strangers or read for people I had never met. And there's something kind of like scary when you know nothing about a person and you still have to give them a reading. So I really enjoyed that challenge. So these days I do have, you can book a reading with me through my link below. I don't I don't have a lot of clients, and that's okay. I have it, in case anyone really wants one, they can have a reading with me. And I do really enjoy reading for folks, but like I'm a full-time graduate student, so I don't have like a ton of time to kind of really dedicate this into turning it into something more of a business anyways. And it's really just something that it's something that I really enjoy doing for friends and doing for friends of friends. And academia isn't a sure thing, right? It's a very precarious job market thing. So I always say that tarot is kind of my plan B if things don't work out and I don't get to grow up and be a professor someday. Then at least I can be a tarot reader. So at least I've got that going for me. The next question number 5, what are some of your qualities from your background that make you a good reader? That is, what do you bring to the table as a reader? And what do you think your tarot superpower is? So in another lifetime, before I was into tarot and before I was into anthropology, I did stagecraft and design for about 10 years, so like technical theater stuff. I did lighting design and set design and costume design and all of the backstage stuff. So I think one of the things that I bring to a reading is just the ability to kind of like set and demarc a space. So thinking about like all of the things that go into like the staging of a tarot reading. Like I'm into you gotta have the cloth, you've got to have the candle, I've got this chair, I am in my fantasy, my client or you or my friend or whoever is sitting on the couch, which is just over there. We've got some tea, we're pouring out tea, and like everything's matching. It's really cute. And like you light the candle and it's all of that. Part of what I think makes a tarot reading feel really special is the care taken to set some kind of like ritual space. So I think that's something I bring to a tarot reading. Another thing that I think makes me potentially a good tarot reader, and hopefully also a good anthropologist, is I'm someone who's always been a really empathetic listener. So in anthropology, as in tarot reading, one of the things that you really have to do is to listen closely to people talk about the problems and the way they're experiencing their life, and really pay attention to people's experience from their own perspective. And in anthropology, you're trying to kind of understand that, record that, and then represent that experience to others. And in a tarot reading, you're taking a lot of that in, and then you're also kind of through the cards that come up, you're trying to feed those cards back to another person's experience in some way. And so I think that might be another one of my one of my strengths as a reader. And then lastly, I'm also a as part of graduate school, I also have to be a graduate student instructor. They call them GSIs in Michigan. They're known as TAs elsewhere. So I teach, and I want to, when I grow up, I want to be a professor. We'll see if that happens. But so I do think that I've been able to kind of, I'm good at explaining things, I hope. And so in a tarot reading, especially when you're reading for someone who's like brand new to tarot, to kind of explaining them or talking people through the steps for the first time, I think that's another thing that I enjoy doing and that I think I'm good at. So that's question 5. All right, so my last question is, when did you get into TarotTube, and what is your relationship like with tarot and social media? So as I mentioned earlier, after that summer I was in India, and I had the breakup, and I came back, and I was really looking to get into tarot. I started looking, just Pinterest, Google, Instagram, at a lot of different tarot decks, and I became just like completely obsessed. And I don't remember exactly how I stumbled into TarotTube, but I think it was just through like deck flip throughs, and then I realized there was more and more content out there. And one of the first channels I found was Naha at 22 Teachings. She was doing this sort of like 30-day tarot series, and I just got completely hooked. And she's also a big inspiration around my LA focus in my research. And I've been working with a group of Hermetic Kabbalists and ceremonial magicians out in LA for the LA portion of my research. So I found her channel. I also found Kasha from Tarot Map. My mom's mom, so my grandmother, was from Poland, and so I love everything that Tarot Map does, and so those were some of like the first big channels that I came across, and then it just sort of grew and sort of snowballed from there. And then this summer I was about to do my preliminary exams. This is about a year after, the summer after my big sort of tarot awakening. That was my first year having Instagram. I was late to the party, but I saw a lot of people who were just doing tarot, like daily draws on Instagram, and I thought it would be a good way for me to like start my day is by like, posting like a daily draw kind of thing. And so I decided to start a tarot focused Instagram, and a bunch of friends and I around that time had rediscovered, I don't know if you guys have ever seen, but there's the the opossum massage lady on YouTube. You can pause and check that out if you'd like. But she's just this sort of like outlandish lady who's giving you all these tips around opossums, and she's also got this website where she's just like a pet intuitive, and she's getting messages from Pearl, her pet squirrel, and I was hooked. And so for my tarot Instagram, I thought that, I have this amazing cat, and what if she's magic, which of course she is. And so I came up with the name Catomancy, and she's been a core part of my tarot Instagram internet presence ever since. And I like having a companion, and at first it just started like very tongue-in-cheek. I didn't anticipate that it would be like a pivotal part of my research, but after a certain point, it's hard to kind of move away from something. And so that's how Catamancy came about. Initially it was just for fun, and then the world broke, and I had to find a way to keep doing my research, and so Catamancy is now part of that journey. for better or for worse. The last thing I want to add about my relationship between tarot and social media is that I'm not someone who's like really into social media to begin with. I actually find, I'm naturally quite an introverted and shy person, if that doesn't already come across. And so having this tarot YouTube channel and Instagram account has really pushed me like kind of very far outside of my usual comfort zone, and it took me a long time to kind of like feel up to doing videos, and it's still something that you know, is a little bit of a challenge for me. Um, the only thing that I feel like is equivocable is like during the pandemic, I was teaching classes over Zoom, and it's a similar thing where like I can't see my audience really, and it's something where you just have to kind of like perform to a camera, and that's not something that really comes naturally for me, but I'm trying. I'm trying for you guys. Um, so with that, that kind of wraps up my 6 questions. Thank you so much if you're still around and listening. I really appreciate it. I know I didn't have a lot of visual aids this time, but I hope you still found it engaging. I would love to hear your tarot origin story. Hashtag tarot origin story, I guess. But thank you very much for watching. I look forward to hearing your responses, and I will be back soon with more questions for you and more videos. Thanks so much. Bye for now.